Welcome to our first content in research methods. So we're going to be talking about sources of beliefs to get started, and that begs the question, what if everything you know is wrong? And so to think about this, we ask the question, what do you yourself know for sure to be true? So just think about that a minute. See if you can think of anything that you are just sure of. You're going to need these ideas later, so if you want to, pause a minute and jot them down. And once you've answered that, the next question is, how do you know it's true? And so let's look at some things that people say are true about love, these quotes. How about this? If you fall in love with their soul before you touch their skin, it's true love. Someone believes that. Oh, no. You know it's true love when you can be yourself. No criticism, no judgment, just acceptance. Acceptance and love, just as you are. So maybe that's how you know it's true love. Or maybe you know it's true love when no matter how far the distance is, he can still make you smile. Thinking about getting married? Now you know how to tell if it's the right one. Or, wait. You know it's true love when somebody has the ability to make you crazy, but then they look into your eyes and your heart still melts. So maybe that's how you know. Or maybe you know it's true love when all you want is for that person to be happy, even if you're not a part of their happiness. So there are all kinds of ideas, things that might be true. How do we know if they're true? So how do you know what you know? So think about the things you've identified a minute ago. See if you can put them into one of these. We're going to be talking about 5, actually kind of 6 ways in this lecture, and you'll be reading about it in your book as well. So the first way that we'll talk about is intuition. I believe it because it feels true. Something inside me tells me it's true. And you might think about this as a gut feeling. You just know it, but you don't know how you know. Nobody told you. You didn't read it anywhere. You didn't reason it out. You just know it. It's coming from your emotional sense. So the second thing we'll talk about is authority. You believe it because you read it, or because you heard it, or because you saw a clip on Facebook, or because the news article said, experts say, ... So some authority figure told you it's true. This is rather an accurate quote. Experts say we can make you trust any agenda as long as it's prefaced with experts say. We tend to believe things when we read experts say. So how many things do you know are true because someone you consider to be an expert said it? And within that idea, we'll talk about tradition. This is how we've always done it. I know it's true because this is how it's always been. And within this, we can think about, say, people who have long communicated with these can phones, and when you communicate with these, you tend to get things that aren't very accurate, but they believe it because that's how they've always communicated. The next way we'll talk about is reasoning. I believe it because I thought through it, and this is the only logical conclusion. So we use our own reasoning, and we'll think about what's good about that and what the risks are with relying on reasoning. Empiricism. I believe it's true because I observed it. I saw it. Really? Because I saw it with my own eyes. I know it happened right in front of me. If I could send proof, I would, but I wasn't exactly videotaping at the time. And so we'll talk about the challenges with our own firsthand experience as well, and how the things we think we see really differ depending on our perspective. And finally, systematic empiricism, or the scientific method. In this case, we don't believe it at all, because belief implies that there is no proof. Instead, we rely on data from careful studies that supports the likelihood of something that is true. And that's the method that we'll be dealing with in our entire class. And so hopefully you'll find this to be a good outline of where we're going in this lecture. So with intuition, we are knowing it because our gut tells us. We just have a gut feeling. Or we might say we know things without knowing how we know. So for example, I should stay away from that guy. Nobody said anything to you, but you just have a feeling. My grandma needs me to call. I'm lost, but I think home is that way. My gut told me she was the right person for the job. I don't really measure my ingredients. I just sort of know what it should look like. And these intuitions come from our emotional center, our limbic system. Our conscious thought processes, which we'll talk about when we go to rationalism, those are our deliberate, intentional thought processes about which we are aware. But our emotional center also has a memory and sends us information as well. And intuition is coming from this emotional experience. So two problems with intuition are expectancy and bias. Expectancy might work like this. Imagine you're a police officer entering a scene in which someone has been reported with a gun. A man appears and withdraws a cell phone from his pocket. Expecting a person with a gun, you may intuitively shoot or stun that person. Your alert expectancy in that situation rendered your intuition incorrect. And secondly, bias. We all have biases, things that we've learned deeply and aren't even aware that we know. So our gut feelings may be based on these pre-existing biases. People may, for example, unwittingly, unconsciously judge someone by the color of their skin, their accent, or their gender. They might attribute this to their gut feeling without realizing their gut is operating on a very old internal bias. The first way we know what we know is through authority, and authority means trusted sources of truth. So the people that we trust to tell us truth varies in our lifetimes by developmental stage. For young children, authority rests primarily with parents or elders or people in the home. That's who they trust to tell them truth, and they believe what is told to them. In adolescence, authority shifts a bit, and it often becomes peers or adults who are approved by our peer group. And those are the people that we trust the most for a period of time for many people. Who are our authorities in adulthood? This is what we have to question because we are, in fact, the ones relegating truth to that next generation. So for adults, authority varies by time and technology. In our current time, well, in the past, authority might have been people we know, like parents, teachers, elders, pastors, governors, or other leaders. So people who were maybe familiar to us or known to us firsthand. But now, a lot of us find out what we know by virtual experts, online sources that we've deemed for some reason to be trustworthy. But we have to be scrupulous and identify these, or we can get sucked into things. When we think about authority, we do have some things to consider. So this is what authority might look like in our lives. Experts say you should never drink coffee or something like that. I saw a flyer that said, my friend said, the podcast said, I saw it on Facebook. Or even my teacher said, my doctor said, my pastor said. So these are the experts that we get our truth from when we're using an authority as our source. And so think about this when you think about our experts, is where did they get their information? What experts were consulted? Who are these ostensible experts? What makes an expert? Is your teacher an expert? Is the podcast an expert? Is a Facebook post an expert? And how tightly do we hold on to our beliefs once we learn something from an expert? So are we willing to be flexible if new information arises? A second type of authority is power-based authority, sometimes called legal rational authority. So power-based authority represents those people who have legitimate power in our society. So people with general power like lawmakers or police officers, or maybe power in relation to you, like teachers, bosses, landlords. And since they're in power, they may cause you to believe things through their positions. So the problem is the person in power may wish to manipulate or deceive. They may have a self-interest of maintaining that power. And of course, they may not be experts. They're very likely not experts in the field they're talking about. But yet they have the means of making their truth seem real. So this is a second type of authority from which we might gain something we think we know. So one type of authority is tradition, or traditional authority, meaning that we do it this way because we've always done it this way, or we believe this because we always believe this. And so the tradition becomes the authority without being imparted by one particular individual. The whole culture promotes it. The definition, tradition, is a perpetuation of a set of beliefs without evidence, but only because it is the way things have always been done. So tradition also sets the stage for beliefs that may be incorrect or may be harmful, may limit personal growth or hinder expectations for growth in another person, may no longer apply in a constantly changing culture, world, and universe. So one example of tradition, I'll use not something from the Navajo Nation, but something from India, who used to have a caste system in which whoever your parents were would dictate how far you could go in society. And there was a lower caste who were considered the untouchables, who had absolutely no role. They couldn't even make eye contact with other people. So that's a tradition that has continued for many, many years, but it hinders growth for many individuals. It's harmful, and it wastes the gifts of many people in the culture. So there is nothing like that, to my knowledge, within the American culture, but I don't know if there's anything regarding roles in the culture that you're from. And then we also have to remember that we are always changing. Technology introduced massive changes into our culture, our world, our universe. And so you need to be cognizant of those changes as well, and traditions that worked in the past may not work anymore. Charismatic authority is one type of authority. That is power legitimized by extraordinary personal abilities that inspire devotion and obedience. Charisma is like a type of charm, a type of flair that people see you and their attention, they gain their attention. People believe them and want to follow them and trust them. And there are cult leaders over time who have experienced such devotion. A cult is a leader who is a group of people who follow a leader in such a dedicated way that they believe everything the leader says. Like Jim Jones was a cult leader, and you would hardly believe it, but his followers were so devoted to him that when he instructed them to kill themselves by drinking poisoned Kool-Aid, they did, hundreds of people. That's a charismatic leader. Charles Manson is another. He had many young people who followed him and who were so devoted to him that they committed murder and lost the rest of their lives spent in prison. And not all cult leaders. It's not all cult leaders. Elizabeth Holmes is a young woman in more recent times who founded a company called Theranos that she claimed would be able to detect all kinds of diseases from a single prick of blood. And the technology never caught up with her. Like it was an idea that maybe in time could have been developed, but she had this charisma that seemed to be linked to her eyes, people said, and she persuaded major investors, even people who have been major political leaders, to invest and to believe what was happening. And I believe she's in prison now. She was convicted, but that's after a lot of people invested a lot of money. And finally, I would point out that not all charismatic authority is bad, and that's why we're susceptible to it. Sometimes charismatic authority is very, very good. We can think of Mother Teresa, who had worked in India and worked directly living among the poor and working with them, and great improvements at the expense of her own well-being. And there didn't seem to be that dark side of self-gain through her efforts. Martin Luther King, boy, you can't overstate the consistency of his message about peaceful protest, his consistent standing up for his people and demanding that it be done with dignity and with an ethical stance that people could live with. So we can think about how we can determine whether someone's charisma is appropriate. And the thing that we have to do is find a balance between our emotions, our need for true leaders, our need to follow, our need to rest calmly, brings us to maybe give over our own control to a different authority. And we have to balance that need with this wonderful cognitive power that we have to think through things, to think rationally and to look for evidence. And that's what we're getting at in this class. Think to yourself, have you ever been susceptible to a charismatic authority? How can you determine? And again, you always want to retain your own authority. You always want to know that you yourself have been given this power to decide and to choose. And you don't want to give it away and get caught in a wave of emotion that might lead you down a path that isn't good. So when the authority is the source of our knowledge, it is wise to question authority. As Benjamin Franklin is quoted as saying, it is the first responsibility of every citizen to question authority. So the third way of knowing, we've covered authority and now we're moving, and intuition, and we're moving on to rationalism. And rationalism is the ability to draw a sound conclusion through logical cognitive consequences. So it's using our just rational thought and leaving anything emotional out of it. The idea is that if we can think about it in a disciplined way, we can arrive at the right conclusion. Logic is the key word, and another way of expressing it, rationalism is the belief that human beings can arrive at truth by using reason, rather than relying on the authority of the past, on religious faith, or on intuition. So it highlights the capacity of our cognitive processes. So some examples of rationalism. We might have arguments like this. We might have givens and conclusions. So in this example, the premise one, or the first given, is the fact that non-renewable resources do not exist in infinite supply. Things like coal and oil. Premise 2, coal is a non-renewable resource. So now we have two facts. Non-renewable resources don't exist, coal is a non-renewable resource, and we can conclude that coal does not exist in infinite supply. So these are the kind of logic that when we rely on our conscious thought processes. Other things include making lists of pros and cons when you're trying to make a decision, doing a cost-benefit analysis, making a decision tree, just taking the emotion out of the piece and relying on your rational thought processes. And a little joke here, my cat's decision-making tree, if any of you have a cat, they're very finicky. Cat asks, is that for me? Yes, I don't want it. Is that for me? No, that's for me. So what is the problem with logic? Well, logic can be sound and accurate. We could have a given, all ducks quack, given, Elsie is a duck, and we could conclude that Elsie quacks. Very good basis. But logic can also be flawed. Look at this example. Given, all ducks quack, given, Elsie quacks, conclusion, Elsie is a duck. This is a flawed conclusion because it doesn't say anything about whether any other sorts of animals quack. All it says is all ducks quack. But we would draw a bad conclusion if we concluded that Elsie is a duck because we over-extrapolated the first premise. So another way that we can run into problems is that we can draw sound conclusions, but our premises could be wrong. So here is an example. Given, all dogs quack. Given, Sheba is a dog. Conclusion, Sheba quacks. Here, the logic is sound. It's exactly like the logic over in the first item. But unfortunately, the first premise is wrong. Dogs do not quack. And so if we base a logical conclusion on a false fact, we also have problems with rationalism. Another example that's more real life, if there's a stereotype that leads to the first premise. So if we have the first given, women are bad at math, second given, Anna, an engineer, is a woman, and we conclude Anna is bad at math, well, here we have another problem with a gut feeling based first premise. And so our conclusion is also bad, but look how this could impact Anna in the field. So that's the problem with logic. So we are going to get at the problems with rationalism a little bit later through a lecture that you'll be watching by someone who's not me. But he'll talk to you about the tunnel vision that can lead us to problems with rationalist thought. So we've already looked at flaws in our reasoning based on false premises or flawed conclusions. So as humans, we tend to get attached to our ideas. We create a tunnel in which we only see phenomena that supports our idea, and we become blind to ideas that refute our idea. In other words, we seek information that confirms our biases, and that is called confirmation bias. And we're going to watch a little video later, as I mentioned, exploring this in more detail, and I'll ask you about this on the quiz. So the fourth way we know is through empiricism, or personal observation. You know it because you saw it. Personal experience says that if you saw it with your own eyes or experienced it in your own body, you must believe it to be true. True generally. And here's an example. She began drinking guayanate tea when she had trouble sleeping, and her sleep improved. So she believes guayanate tea promotes sleep. This is a truth for her. So she believes it, and it might be true for her, but does that make it a general truth? And we would have to question it. It is possible that it is only true for her, or people to similar to her in some way, like maybe they have a biological similarity that allows this tea to help them sleep. Or maybe some other factor, like just the fact that she's sitting down to drink a calming cup of tea at night, maybe that's what actually helped her sleep. So again, her personal experience doesn't make it general truth. She observed this phenomenon, and so she believed it, but she did not observe it systematically, so she doesn't know if it is generally true. And so even our personal experiences can have bias and inaccuracy. So I myself have observed things, have empirical observations, things that I saw, so I believe they're true. So we all probably do this. We observe patterns in our fellow human beings. So for example, when my sons were young, I observed that they seemed irritable when they were allowed screen time for more than half an hour. So does that make this a truth? Does that mean that in general, boys who have screen time for more than half an hour will be irritable? Another example, I've noticed that when I take notes that are handwritten, I remember them better than typed notes. And that when I listen only without taking notes, I really don't remember as much. Does this mean it's true? Is this a truth that we should broadcast and claim for all people? Is it even true for me? Or are either of these even true? Or is there something else going on that I haven't noticed? And so what are your examples? What are your examples of things that you've observed that you believe to be true because you saw them or experienced them? So how we know what we know, the last method, is systematic empiricism, or the scientific method. And what this is acquiring knowledge through observation, just like empiricism, or with instruments that extend our senses. But we're doing it in an orderly, systematic way. We're not just taking our own experience. And we'll talk in the next lecture about how these things must be objective or unbiased outside of the self. They must be testable and falsifiable. and they must be replicable. Example, we might say it seems to be getting hotter each year, but unless we support this with objective data, we do not know if it's true. So there's more to come in the next lecture. Please stay tuned. So the key takeaways are that we know things, or we believe we know things, through authority. People told us. Through intuition, our gut feelings. Through rationalism, our logic. And through empiricism, our personal observations. But only systematic empiricism using scientific methods can yield reliable conclusions. And let's be clear that systematic empiricism has limits to the conclusions it can draw, and that the existence of science doesn't say that all of those other things are untrue, that our gut is wrong, that authority is wrong, that our logic is wrong. That doesn't make those things untrue. It just means that we can't reliably draw those truths because we haven't systematically tested, observed them in a systematic way, systematic empiricism. And that's what science is seeking to do.